Your foreign policy will find it harder to manage if the major powers start fighting. Oil prices are going to shoot up. If there is a war, inflation already high in India. It is a multidimensional crisis. The first is a deeply historical and political question. What is Russia's position in Europe? If you look at the last, 3 or 4 centuries, Russia was very much part of the European order. It was one of the great powers, which, along with, before Germany came, there was Prussia, with Britain, with France, with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with the Ottoman Empire, decided the structure of European politics for centuries. But the 1917, the Russian Revolution, the communist revolution in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution, fundamentally put Russia at odds with the rest of Europe. The West Europeans tried to defeat the revolution. Russia was supporting revolutions in other European countries. And the conflict between the two was not just about power politics, but it acquired a deeply ideological character in 1917. But in the middle of the Second World War, the West needed Russia to fight fascist Germany, but the alliance did not last long. And within 4 years, you saw the old alliance break down into deep enmity between Russia, the Soviet Union then, and the West, where the Cold War came to an end. Now it looked like in 1991 that Russia would now once again become part of Europe, a country which was neglected, whose interests were ignored. Therefore, today, when Russia mobilizes 100,000 troops, 130,000 troops, and says, look, enough is enough, we want to come to some basic understandings about Russia's interests, Russia's role in the regional security orders. The second is beyond the political and the historic, there is an immediate question of security for Russia. You remember in the Cold War, there was the NATO, that's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization of the Western powers. There was the Warsaw Pact of Russia and its East European satellite states at that point of time. So in 1991, the Warsaw Pact collapsed, the Russian military alliance collapsed, but the Western alliance survived. A lot of people thought it was a smart idea to dissolve the NATO and create a single structure of European security. But then NATO persisted, and not only persisted, but kept expanding closer towards Russia. Therefore, Russia now needs to draw a line and say, look, no more. This is enough. We're not going to accept anymore. And we want to reverse, which is what the demands put by Putin to the West a few weeks ago, saying, look, we need security guarantees. We need to stop NATO expansion further. And we need to reverse many of the decisions that were taken since the late 1990s on military weapons deployments. The third aspect of the crisis is the Russian idea of reconstituting. That is, we all think that Humpty Dumpty, when it falls, it can't be put together. But at least the critics of Putin, President Putin, say, look, what Putin is trying to do since he came to power in 2000 is to put the Humpty Dumpty back. That he wants to stitch back the old Soviet Union in a different form. They have this Eurasian Economic Union. He's created a central a security organization like the Warsaw Pact, this time with a lot of the former members of the Warsaw Pact, and a lot of the former members, not Warsaw Pact, former members of the Soviet Union. He's trying to reconstitute a political, military, economic reintegration of what was the Soviet space. Of course, you're not actually integrating them, but you're creating institutions and structures for putting together the Humpty Dumpty of the Soviet Union into a reasonable place. For Putin, the idea that, look, in a recent speech, he wrote that, look, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. He sees putting Humpty Dumpty back as his great legacy for Russia and his contribution to Russian history. This is trying to carve out a new Russian sphere of influence. Now, that the West says today, no such thing. We can't just accept Russia gaining a kind of veto over its neighborhood, that it must sanitize the neighborhood. Many of the former Soviet republics, like the Baltic republics, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, they said, look, we're quite happy outside the Soviet Union. Give us, I mean, why would we want to go back in? The fourth dimension of the crisis is what should be Ukraine's international relations. That is, a no to NATO. I mean, no Ukraine in NATO is the main demand that Russia has put. Okay, you come this far. I mean, enough is enough. But you give me a written guarantee that Ukraine will never be admitted into NATO. But NATO's problem is they have promised Ukraine that they'll take them in 2008. But practically speaking, in fact, Biden has said this as much, President Biden, look, there is no way we can take Ukraine. It's not going to happen tomorrow. So I can tell you I'm not going to take him. But Russia said, no, give it in writing, that you will never take him. So no Ukraine in NATO and no NATO in Ukraine. The nature of, there is a problem of Ukraine's domestic structure. So it's not just about Ukraine's international relations. There is also the problem of Ukraine's internal relations. There are large Russian-speaking populations. Russia has already taken Crimea. I mean, then you have the Eastern Ukraine, where Russia has backed the independent entities. Russia wants deep devolution of federalism, of a deep federalism. This is the question of legacy. I mean, he's been in power for 20 years. I mean, he's succeeded in reviving the Russian economy. He's kind of revitalized the country. So he sees, look, the injustice that was done in 1991 must be corrected. And one reason, he thinks that at this point, he thought probably, maybe wrongly, the West was too divided. US wants to go into Asia, so Indo-Pacific. So they're distracted. So this might be a good. And remember, Biden actually reached out to Putin, unlike Trump and Obama, right in the beginning of his administration, said, look, let's come to some kind of an understanding on Europe, because my problem is China. Therefore, let's settle in Europe. But what Putin has done is to raise the stakes dramatically. Right? See, Pakistan thinks it can take Kashmir by force. It can't be. 75 years have gone by. A lot of countries have historic memories who want to take back territories, which they say in their national history belong to them. China says, look, whole of South China Sea was mine. China says, Arunachal Pradesh is mine. So China says Vladivostok, even Eastern Russia was once part of China, therefore it's mine. So Turkey now says, look, it has got, put back the great Ottoman Empire together. And just because you had a shared past, you will have a shared, you can go back to that past. Is very difficult. And I think that's where the problem between Russia and Ukraine is. The Ukrainians also being new nationalists, they want to change the script from Cyrillic to Latin. So once you introduce nationalism, ethnic nationalism, it creates a logic of its own. And that going back to the past becomes very, very hard. Here is what is needed. Russia, if it provokes, it kind of bullies its neighbors. He's trying to look for balancing actors, right? This is what they try to get some other big power to protection against Russia. So the big countries have to win over the small one. And the smaller one should be careful not to provoke your big neighbor, because once, like that's how Crimea happened. That's why some territory is already lost for Ukraine. So I think this is where the prudence and balance of trying to get together with the new historical circumstances is a big challenge, but it makes very hard in a nationalist mode to be able to produce that an understanding where both of us live in peace. Your foreign policy will find it harder to manage if the major powers start fighting. Then what happens if there are sanctions, serious sanctions? We already have CATSA, which is S-400. We buying from the Russians and the Americans. The law says there should be sanctions. We're still not clear whether Washington would give us a waiver. If they don't give us a waiver in this new situation, that will be a problem. We have large number of Indians in Ukraine. Oil prices are going to shoot up if there is a war of any kind. Indian economy just about to take off. And it will have serious consequences, that inflation already high in India. Therefore, your economic prospects in a huge oil price hike that could come from this war will create problems. If Russia says, look, I've taken Crimea, I've done a referendum, and therefore now 90% said they would like to join Russia, so therefore it is mine. But India has a problem with the notion of referendum, that you can take somebody else's territory. in the name of ethnic solidarity, religious solidarity. Do a referendum and say, this is mine. Say tomorrow, if Pakistan does the same thing in POK. They drop the drama of being independent, Azad Kashmir, and say, look, okay, here's a referendum. They've joined us. Will India accept it? So this, in fact, when referendum took place in Crimea, the Hurriyat in India issued a statement in Kashmir. See, referendum is a great idea. Let's do referendum. In Kashmir, India has agreed to referendum. Please do a referendum and let's be done with it. So I think that is, for India, this is always a major issue. We've not debated this because of friendship to Russia. I don't want to talk about it. But the fact is what they've done in Crimea, and if they do it again in eastern Ukraine, I doubt if India will ever support that kind of an action. But if they come to blows, we have to deal with the consequences. So I think the Russians will put pressure to look at us. Please give us some support. We are, in this terrible situation vis-a-vis the West. West will say, look, we are your buddies. We are part of the Quad. We are part of all this. Are you going to be with the Russians, or do you stand for any principle of, one country should not take over another country? What has changed from 2014 is that our interests with the West are far deeper today, and our economic interests are largely with the US and Europe today. And you saw Putin, Xi Jinping summit. Xi Jinping didn't mention Ukraine in the joint statement. Even the Chinese will say, look, okay, you're fighting with them. I don't want to be, I have problems. I have problems with Europe. I don't want to add another problem. I can make a general statement about NATO expansion, but I'm not going to simply walk in and support you. And this is going to be the problem for the Russians. Look, if you're fighting with another big power, everybody is going to judge their own interests. I mean, this is not run on sentiment, right? This is not a Sant Samaj international affairs. So people calculate their interests. Even Chinese are not going to go full hog with them. And Indians, there's no question of putting ourselves out to defend the Russians when they get into Ukraine. India is not small anymore. It's on its road to becoming the third largest country. So we can navigate this with some finesse, take strong positions on principle, but at the same time, make sure that our interests are met, and trying to secure the best way we can get our interests, secure our interests. Therefore, as I said, look, the different phases of US-Russia-China relationship in the last 70 years, it's gone ups and downs. So there's no guarantee that it will go on. And China today is 10 times bigger than China. In the 50s, China was the junior partner. Today, Russia is the junior partner. And a Russia that is fighting with the US and Europe, what value would it have for China? They're going to treat the Russians even more badly. We have a problem with China, and whatever else happens, the central point today is our problem with China is real, is deep, and is unlikely to change. So our interests are depending on how do I balance China. Whoever helps me in that, we have to go in that direction.